Before the sequel's release, there was a comic book titled Maximo Beauty's Only Sword Deep by the Canadian publisher Dreamwave. According to an old article by IGN dated June 5, 2003, Capcom signed the deal with Dreamwave to include several Capcom properties in their comic book series, with Mega Man, Devil May Cry, and Maximo among them. The comic's events depicted Maximo embarking on his quest to find Sophia once again. The world called upon Maximo the hero to save a kingdom from the clutches of darkness once more. This darkness took shape in the form of Scab and his minions of demons known as the Rot. Written by Bo Smith and illustrated by Alan Wang, Maximo's comic was one of Dreamwave's last comics before shutting down in January 2005. Unfortunately, Dreamwave never got the chance to finish either the Maximo or Mega Man book series, with only one issue released for Maximo. As a result, the story remains unfinished to this day. The success of Maximo Ghosts to Glory left Capcom with no other option but to greenlit a sequel, and production began almost immediately afterwards. At this juncture, CDS would be rebranded as Capcom Production Studio 8. The first hint of a sequel emerged during one of David Siller's interviews with Electronic Gaming Monthly in May 2002. Shortly after this announcement, David Siller was reportedly fired from Capcom for some reasons unknown. That's the narrative that has circulated online for years. However, I may have a theory about why Capcom dismissed David Siller, which we'll delve into later. The sequel introduced numerous changes and improvements, all of which made it well worth the wait. Maximo's character design received a notable polish, portraying him with a more serious demeanor and a muscular physique. The story continued from where the original game left off. Maximo is still looking for his bride to be Sophia, and a new threat has once again emerged: the Army of Zin. A swarm of mechanical soldiers led by the wicked Bane is wreaking havoc and threatening the existence of humanity. Only Maximo can put an end to such horror. Despite David Siller's absence from the sequel, Maximo remained in capable hands. While the original paid homage to Ghosts and Goblins, the sequel took a different approach. Titled Maximo vs. Army of Zin, the game retained the core gameplay of the original while expanding upon it by introducing a robust hack-and-slash system. In Maximo vs. Army of Zin, Maximo gains access to a library of combos, wields a hammer as his secondary weapon, and possesses the ability to transform into the Grim Reaper at will. However, players can upgrade their transformation meter as they progress through the story. Money plays a crucial role in the sequel, serving as the currency for purchasing moves, power-ups, items, and potions, thus enhancing the depth of gameplay. Everything was upgraded in the sequel except for one aspect: the level design. Instead of the Disneyland-esque design from the original, the sequel opted for a more linear approach, allowing players to choose which levels they wanted to tackle. While players could still revisit old levels if they needed to, the whimsical and sprawling level design of the original was, unfortunately, absent. On May 4, 2003, IGN published an article detailing upcoming games from Capcom. Among them were titles like Chaos Legion, Onimusha 3, Mega Man X7, Beautiful Joe, and of course, Maximo vs. Army of Zin. The E3 trailer for Maximo vs. Army of Zin left everyone in awe. As mentioned earlier, the sequel saw significant improvements in the combat system. Maximo became fast and robust, swift and stylish, powerful and heroic. 2 years after the release of the original game, Maximo vs. Army of Zin launched in Japan, South Korea, the USA, Europe, Australia, and Germany. Similar to the situation with Ghosts to Glory, the sequel was initially released in Japan before launching in other parts of the world. However, unlike the original game, Maximo vs. Army of Zin received a different title in Japan. It was named Yuki Makishimo Machine Monster no Yabo, which translates to Records of the Demon World Hero Maximo, Ambition of the Machine Monsters. But here's the catch. Despite releasing in Japan, Maximo vs. Army of Zin did not receive any Japanese dubbing. The entire game was played in English dub, while the text was presented in Japanese. The lack of Japanese dubbing for Maximo vs. Army of Zin is peculiar, especially considering that Ghosts of Glory had an entire cast of voice actors for its Japanese version. The sequel received extensive marketing support from Capcom of America and Capcom of Europe. Print ads, trailers, posters, and even toys were created to promote the game. But on the other hand, Capcom of Japan didn't market the sequel as they did with the original. It felt as if they gave up before even trying. This was strange, since Capcom heavily marketed the first game in Japan and that marketing paid off for them. But when it came to the sequel, there was just so little. Maximo vs. Army of Zin received critical acclaim upon its release. Its success even resulted in the game being re-released in the Greatest Hits label once again for the PS2, which is only given to games selling over 500k copies. Therefore, from a commercial standpoint, the game performed well in the USA. On the one hand, the game flopped in Japan. It could be because of the lack of marketing or something else. As for Europe, nobody knows how well the game performed over there. Things don't seem as simple as they look. It turns out that there was a reason why Capcom of Japan didn't market the sequel. There was another reason why Capcom fired David Siller. All of this will be explored in the next chapter. Before the sequel's release, David Siller shared in one of his deleted tweets that Yoshiki Okamoto had approached him to work on a Mega Man Zero 3D hack-and-slash game using the Maximo engine. According to Siller, things took a turn for the worse thereafter. Despite the promising idea on paper, it never happened. Fast forwarding through these events, we find David Siller being terminated from Capcom. Why was he fired? There could be several reasons. Number 1. Okamoto witnessed the success of Maximo, a Capcom game made by an American branch, and wanted to take credit for its creation. All of it, despite having little involvement with the project. Number 2. David Siller refused to comply with Okamoto's bizarre demands, so the latter fired him. Number 3. There are other reasons we don't know about, but what we know is that firing David Siller was a huge mistake. Complications between Capcom of Japan and Capcom of USA escalated to severe levels at this point, with communication between the two becoming a big problem. This frustrated the American branch of Capcom as they couldn't predict what Capcom of Japan was even planning. Ironically, Angel Studios, the guys who were working on Red Dead Revolver under Capcom, were also angry with how the communication and treatment of Capcom of Japan was a frustrating thing to deal with. It's why they were happy Capcom sold the Red Dead property to Rockstar on a silver plate. Angel Studios was freed from the clutches of Capcom, but Maximo didn't have that freedom of choice. The issue between Capcom of Japan and Capcom of USA has already been brewing since Ghosts of Glory, leading to several developers leaving the company. But after the Army of Zin's release, more and more developers from the American and Japanese branches were leaving in droves. What happened to Maximo amidst this fiasco? And what was the fate of Capcom Production Studio 8? The year 2003 was coming strong with new intellectual properties, and companies were preparing for the future that would change everything. Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty were big in the market. Arcade-style games and platformers were in decline, while mobile gaming was on the rise. Companies had to adapt to the future to survive, otherwise they were left behind. Jak and Daxter was one of the first victims of this change, as the second installment would change the series forever. There was less and less emphasis on platforming and more on action shooting and completing missions. Maximo was also a casualty of this sudden change in the industry. Maximo 3, while not officially revealed, was once in development, and to stay up to date with the tides of time, the developers were implementing several mature and edgy ideas. In this short gameplay segment of the prototype, you can see that Maximo 3 had a lock-on system. Maximo can move in all directions and pull a gun. Yes, to stay up to date with the current trends, Maximo once wielded a gun in this prototype build. However, according to Jonathan Casco, the developers felt that some of the ideas didn't blend well with Maximo, so the gun was omitted and was later used in Final Fight Streetwise. Maximo 3, just like the previous installments, was an ambitious project, but it came with a cost. First, Susumu Matsushita was no longer involved in the creation of the art of the game. Instead, the art was done by several artists, and in the process, Maximo's character design went through several changes before settling with the final look. Second, the gameplay of the third sequel was more open, more interactive, and more varied. Players were free to explore the surroundings, converse with NPCs, and dabble in basic parkour with little platforming involved. Third, a train of ideas was making its way into the creation of this game. Maximo was to wield a sword, an axe, claws, and even transform into several forms. Maximo 3, with all of the ideas that have been shown, was gearing up to be the best game in the series. But that never happened. In the end, Maximo 3 never happened. Key members from the previous two games ended up leaving the project, including Scott Rogers, who helped drive the level design and storyboards of the games. Others eventually followed suit. At this point, Maximo 3 hasn't fallen apart. There was still a glimmer of hope yet for the game. All of that hope was shattered when Tom Sekine one day decided to cancel Maximo 3 with orders from Yoshiki Okamoto to work on his game.
Capcom Digital Studios changed its name and was working on this version of Maximo 3, this time not using Susumu Matsushita's art. Tom Sekine cancelled it to do his Final Fight game under orders from Okamoto in Japan, a David Siller creation while at Capcom, but had long since departed.
Final Fight Streetwise ended up performing poorly on the commercial and critical side, and this was, unfortunately, the nail in the coffin for both Capcom Production Studio 8 and Maximo. Why did Capcom of Japan kill Maximo despite doing well? That's what many have been asking for years. The answer to that is simple. Capcom of Japan was afraid of Maximo's success, and since Yoshiki Okamoto wasn't involved in its production or any of the higher-ups at Capcom of Japan, they buried it fast. This was even said by David Siller himself in a YouTube comment. Will Maximo ever come back? Will it ever get a remaster or a remake release? Answer to these questions is probably no. Capcom doesn't care about Maximo. As David Siller said, Capcom has made sure they buried the series forever. Every year, Capcom loves to commemorate their beloved characters either by including them into certain events, fighting games, or even books. Sadly, Capcom never commemorated Maximo or acknowledged his existence. For years, players have been pinging Capcom on every social media platform to revive the series, but Capcom never replied to these wishes in any form or shape. Maximo may be gone, but he remains in our memory. Perhaps in a different future, Maximo 3 did happen, and Maximo did reach the end of his quest to reunite with Queen Sophia.